You know that feeling when you are sitting in a coffee shop, trying to think, and there is a conversation happening 3 tables over that you cannot tune out. Not because it is loud exactly, but because something about it just gets under your skin in a way that the background music does not. You have tried to concentrate. You have shifted in your seat. You have maybe even moved to a different table. And still the noise follows you, not as sound, but as tension you carry somewhere between your shoulders and your jaw. Most people around you seem fine. They are typing, reading, sipping their drinks. And so you start to wonder quietly if the problem is not the noise, if the problem might be you. And by the end of this, you will understand why some brains are literally wired to experience noise as threat, and why the solution most people reach for actually makes things worse. Let us start with the paradox at the center of all of this. We live in the loudest era in human history. Trucks, leaf blowers, open-plan offices, notification sounds, the hum of air conditioning that is just slightly off the frequency you can consciously notice, the neighbor who seems to mow his lawn specifically when you sit down to do anything requiring thought. And the standard advice, the thing you hear from productivity coaches and well-meaning friends, is some version of just block it out, put on headphones, learn to focus, build mental toughness, as if sensitivity to noise is a defect to be corrected, a failure of willpower, a problem that with enough effort you can simply override. The philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote in the 1600s, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." He meant it as a spiritual observation, a comment on our restlessness. But I think if he had known about the neurological literature on sensory processing, he might have added a footnote. Because the inability to sit quietly is not always about restlessness. Sometimes it is about a nervous system that does not process quiet and noise the same way everyone else does. And treating a neurological difference as a moral failing is not just unhelpful, it is actively harmful. So why does noise feel so overwhelming to some people while others seem unbothered? That is what we are going to sit with today. The first thing to understand is that the way your brain processes sensory information is not uniform across all humans. In 1996, the psychologist Elaine Aron published research introducing the concept she called highly sensitive persons, or HSPs. She estimated that roughly 15 to 20% of the human population, and interestingly, a similar percentage appears in over 100 species of animals, share a trait called sensory processing sensitivity. These are not people who are simply anxious or neurotic. They are people whose brains are neurologically wired to process information more deeply. They notice subtleties others miss. They are moved more easily by art, music, and beauty. And they are also more easily overwhelmed by sensory intensity, by crowds, by noise, by environments that are simply too much. The key finding from Aron's work was that this is not a disorder. It is a trait. It is heritable. It appears across cultures, and it has evolutionary logic behind it. In a group of humans, having some members who are more finely attuned to subtle environmental signals, who notice the faint sound in the forest before everyone else, who pick up on changes in the social atmosphere, was genuinely adaptive. The world needed those people. It still does. The problem is that the modern built environment was not designed for them. Now here's where it gets more specific. In 2014, a team of neuroscientists published findings showing that the brains of highly sensitive persons show greater activation in areas associated with awareness, empathy, and self-other processing, particularly the insula and the anterior cingulate cortex. These are regions that do not just process sensory input, they integrate it emotionally, socially, and bodily. So when someone with this trait hears a jackhammer outside the window, or a television playing in the next room, they are not just hearing sound. They are having a whole body, whole nervous system experience of that sound. They feel it. And the effort of trying to ignore it is not a small cost. It is metabolically and neurologically expensive. Think of it this way. Imagine you are trying to have a phone call in a room where someone is slowly dragging a chair across a hardwood floor. For most people, that sound registers, bothers them briefly, and then fades to the background. For someone with high sensory processing sensitivity, that sound does not fade. It stays in the foreground, competing for the same cognitive resources they are trying to use for the conversation. Telling that person to just ignore it is a bit like telling someone to ignore the sensation of their hand touching a hot stovetop. The nervous system is designed to prioritize it. You cannot simply choose otherwise. There is a second piece of research worth knowing about here. In 2011, psychologist Michael Plewis and his colleagues introduced the concept of differential susceptibility, sometimes called the orchid and dandelion theory of human development. The idea is this: most people are like dandelions. They grow reasonably well in all kinds of conditions. But some people are like orchids. They are exquisitely sensitive to their environment. In harsh conditions, they struggle more than dandelions. But in the right conditions, carefully tended, they flourish more brilliantly than dandelions ever could. The research shows that these highly sensitive individuals, these orchids, show the strongest negative responses to adverse environments, but also the strongest positive responses to supportive ones. This is important because it reframes sensitivity not as weakness, but as amplification. You are not broken. You are not defective. You are someone for whom environment matters more. And that is a double-edged thing to carry. It means you suffer more in the wrong environments. But it also means you experience joy, beauty, connection, and meaning more intensely when the conditions are right. The same nervous system that makes a crowded, noisy office feel like a kind of torture is also the nervous system that makes a beautiful piece of music feel like it reaches somewhere inside you that nothing else can touch. But there is a third dimension to this that we have not talked about yet, and it is the one that is hardest to sit with. Noise sensitivity does not exist in isolation. It is often tangled up with our relationship to control, to uncertainty, and to the thing that psychologist Jonathan Haidt calls the emotional tail wagging the rational dog. When you are already anxious, already running on a low-grade sense of threat, sound becomes harder to tolerate. Not because the sound is louder, but because your baseline threat detection system is already activated. The noise does not have to be objectively terrible to feel overwhelming. It just has to arrive when your nervous system has no more room. This is the part that makes the conventional advice so damaging. When someone tells you to just block it out, they are implicitly telling you that the problem is your response, not the environment. They are treating the symptom as the diagnosis, and the person who already doubts themselves, who already wonders if they are too sensitive, too high maintenance, too much, tends to internalize that message. And internalized, it does not produce resilience. It produces shame, and shame does not quiet the nervous system. It activates it further. So, what do we do with all of this? Here is where I want to offer a reframe that I think is more honest and ultimately more useful. It comes from the intersection of two ideas, one from philosophy and one from psychology, and it starts with a question that Aristotle would have recognized. What is the good life, and what kind of conditions does it require? Aristotle, writing in the 4th century BCE, articulated the concept of eudaimonia, which gets translated as happiness or flourishing, but is really closer to the idea of living in full accordance with your nature. For Aristotle, the good life was not a one-size-fits-all proposition. It was about understanding your own nature deeply enough to create the conditions in which you could genuinely thrive. And this is not a license for self-indulgence. It is an invitation to genuine self-knowledge. The Stoic philosophers, writing a few centuries after Aristotle, had a complementary idea. They drew a sharp distinction between what they called things up to us and things not up to us. The noise outside the window is not up to you. Whether you can work with the window open is not always up to you. But your relationship to your own nature, your understanding of what you actually need, and the choices you make in light of that understanding, those are up to you. The Stoic practice was not about suppressing your nature. It was about knowing it clearly enough to navigate from it, rather than being blindly controlled by it. And then there is Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor who developed what he called logotherapy, or the search for meaning. Frankl's core insight, drawn from conditions of suffering so extreme most of us cannot imagine them, was that the one freedom that cannot be taken from a person is the freedom to choose one's attitude toward one's circumstances. But I want to be careful here. Frankl did not mean that you should simply accept everything and feel nothing. He meant something more precise, that you have the capacity to relate to your circumstances from a stance of meaning rather than from a stance of victimhood or helplessness. And for someone who lives with genuine sensory sensitivity, that distinction matters enormously, because the alternative, the thing that many sensitive people end up doing, is building their life around avoidance. Avoiding the noisy restaurant, declining the invitation because the venue will be overwhelming, choosing not to go to concerts, not to take certain jobs, not to live in certain cities. And sometimes that is genuinely the right call. Sometimes protecting your nervous system is wisdom, not weakness. But if avoidance becomes the organizing principle of your life, it starts to cost you things that matter. It starts to shrink the world down to only the places that feel safe. And safety, unexamined, has a way of quietly becoming its own kind of prison. There is a concept in psychology called window of tolerance, developed by the psychiatrist Daniel Siegel. The idea is that every person has a range of emotional and physiological arousal within which they can function well, be present, think clearly, and connect with others. Too little stimulation, and you drift into numbness, dissociation, flatness. Too much, and you tip into overwhelm, hyperactivation, the feeling that everything is too much. The goal, Siegel argues, is not to eliminate the possibility of being pushed outside that window. The goal is to understand where your window is and to gradually, gently, widen it over time. This is different from the toxic resilience narrative that tells you to simply push through, to white-knuckle your way past discomfort. It is also different from the avoidance narrative that says, if it hurts, stop. It is something more nuanced. It is the idea that you can, with support, with intention, and with the right kind of practice, expand your capacity for difficulty without destroying yourself in the process. But you have to start from an honest place. You have to start by acknowledging what your actual window is, not the window you wish you had, or the window you think you should have, but the actual one. So what does that look like in practice? I want to offer you 3 things, not as a checklist, not as a prescription, but as invitations to sit with. The first is this: stop diagnosing yourself through other people's eyes. This is harder than it sounds. Most people who struggle with noise sensitivity have spent years, sometimes decades, receiving the implicit message that their sensitivity is a problem to be fixed. They have learned to look at their own experience through the eyes of the people who seem unbothered, and to conclude that they are failing at something. What I am inviting you to do instead is to get genuinely curious about your own experience without the overlay of judgment. Not, why can I not handle this? But, what is actually happening in my body right now? Not, what is wrong with me? But, what do I actually need? These are not easy questions to sit with, especially if your instinct is to dismiss your own needs before anyone else has the chance to. But they are the right questions. The second invitation is to think about environment as design, not fate. One of the most quietly liberating ideas I have encountered is that you have more agency over your environment than you might think, and that exercising that agency is not self-indulgence. It is self-respect. This might look like negotiating to work from home on days when you have deep work to do. It might look like making noise-reducing changes to your living space, using rugs, soft furnishings, white noise machines. Whatever genuinely helps. It might look like being honest with the people in your life about what you need, not as an apology, but as information. You are allowed to know what works for your nervous system and to act on that knowledge. You are allowed to design your environment rather than simply suffer inside it. The third invitation is the most difficult, and it is this: practice distinguishing between noise that is a genuine problem and noise that has become a container for something else. Sometimes the overwhelming quality of sound is not really about the sound. It is about the email you have not answered, the conversation you are dreading, the low-grade anxiety about something you cannot quite name. When the nervous system is already loaded with unexpressed stress, noise becomes the last straw, not the cause. And if you only address the noise, the relief is temporary. So the practice here is to build a small habit of checking in with yourself, not just about the external environment, but about the internal one. What am I already carrying today? What is underneath the sensitivity right now? Not as a way of invalidating the sensitivity, but as a way of understanding it more fully. I want to be honest with you about something. Knowing all of this does not make the noise go away. Understanding that you are a highly sensitive person does not make the open plan office tolerable. Reading Frankl and the Stoics does not soundproof your apartment. The intellectual understanding of your own nature is only the beginning. The actual work, the daily imperfect nonlinear work of learning to live with your own nervous system, is a different thing entirely. And I have been there too. I know what it is like to sit in a space that other people find perfectly comfortable and to feel like you are slowly coming apart at the seams and to hate yourself a little for it. The shame is often worse than the noise itself. That I am sure of. But here is what I have come to believe, and it is the thing I want to leave you with. Sensitivity is not a malfunction. It is a mode of perception, and like any mode of perception, it can be a burden or a gift depending on what you do with it and what conditions you choose to build around it. The person who is moved by music others cannot hear, who picks up on emotional undercurrents in a room before anyone has said a word, who finds a quiet afternoon in the right space genuinely replenishing in a way that other people simply do not. That person is not broken. That person is paying a different kind of attention to the world. And the world, whatever it tells you, needs that kind of attention. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote in a letter to a young friend, "Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act, just once, with beauty and courage." I have always found that a difficult sentence because it does not promise that the hard things will go away. It suggests something stranger and more interesting, that the hard things might be guarding something worth finding. The noise that overwhelms you is real. The sensitivity is real. The struggle is real. And it might also be the thing that, tended carefully, becomes one of your most human qualities. This topic connects to something I think about a lot, which is the gap between what the world tells us we should be and what our actual nature requires in order to flourish. If that kind of conversation is one you want to keep having, subscribing means you will not miss the next one. And I am genuinely curious. When noise or overwhelm shows up for you, what is it usually covering for underneath? I would love to know.